Welcome to the Hickory Podcast, which stands for Hope, Health, and Healing in concert with ourselves and the earth. Today, we're going to bring you the second part of our interview of Dr. Bir Singh Khalsa. He talks about his lifelong research in yoga. When he talks about yoga, he's specifically talking about the postures, breathing, relaxation, and meditation, all four aspects in the yoga that he studies. And if you're interested in looking up further research about yoga, please check out the website Yoga Alliance. So without further, here's our interview.
Enjoy.
Patients need. Also, yoga helps the brain to focus. And I know there's research specifically on the deleterious effects of a wandering brain, which I think is probably more of a modern brain. Yoga can also help one achieve metacognition. And this is probably a bit with the transcendence, but the realization that we are not our own thoughts and that we do have some control over them. And the one other thing that yoga does, which you mentioned already, is that self-regulation of our autonomic nervous system to reduce stress.
Right.
So I wondered if you can elaborate this on this and have any suggestions on how to help avoid that wandering brain and instead more look to achieve this metacognition and self-regulation with yoga or however.
So yoga incorporates meditation. As I said, traditional yoga incorporates meditation as a major component, a major feature of its practice. In fact, if you read the seminal historical document of yoga, which is Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it's all about meditation. It's all about the focus of attention. So what happens when you focus your attention is that you engage the attention networks of the brain. And meditation, simply defined, is the relaxed, non-analytical focus of attention. So if you're playing a chess game or you're doing a math problem, that's focus of attention, certainly, but it's analytical. And meditation is sort of more observational. And different meditation practices basically differ in what you're focusing on. So in yoga, we often do what's called single point focus or concentrated meditation. We're focusing on a single target, like the breath, the repetition of a sound or a word, or a candle or something like this. It's a single item. Whereas in sort of a more distributed form of meditation, which is more along the lines of mindfulness meditation, the focus of attention is on the flow of thought or the flow of sensation itself. And then there's other forms of meditation like guided imagery, in which the focus of attention is on this imagery, like, for example, imagine you're on a beach and the waves are coming in, the sun is shining, and so on. So your focus of attention is on this imagery. In all of these cases, you're engaging the attention networks of the brain. Now, as you do this as a practice continuously on a regular basis, you become much better at controlling your attention. And what happens during meditation, and this happens to everyone that meditates, is that as they're meditating, they'll find that there's an intrusion of mind wandering. They'll be just focusing their attention on the breath and everything's going fine. And then 15, 30 seconds later, they're thinking about the temperature in the room, and that goes on to thinking about the thermostat, and that goes on to thinking about the heating bill, which goes on to thinking about the checkbook balance, which goes to thinking about the job and talking to the boss about a raise. And then people notice, I'm supposed to be meditating. And then they let go of that mind wandering and bring it back to the breath. And this happens over and over and over and over again during meditation practice. And so that is, those are the two states that are involved in meditation. And mind wandering is now starting to be studied. And what we know about this is that there's a network of brain regions that are involved in mind wandering. Now, mind wandering is a positive thing. It's a survival feature that humans have. And it's there for a survival purpose, and it has a lot of value. But when it becomes excessive, that's when it becomes problematic. Because a lot of the thoughts that we have when our mind is wandering are related to survival. Am I going to make it to work on time? Am I going to make enough money this year? Will I get hit by the bus crossing the traffic? I mean, all of these survival thoughts have some degree of a stress response and a negative emotionality. So if you allow that to dominate and you're constantly mind wandering with that focus, you end up with a mood disturbance and chronic stress. So meditation, when you focus your attention, well, of course, the attention networks can only do one thing at a time. So you disengage from mind wandering and you're focusing on the breath. So there's a quiet there. You're sort of free from the mind wandering. So it's a mini holiday, if you will, from the mind wandering. The total amount of time you spent focusing on the breath is time that your mind is not engaging in all this survival related stuff. But what is more important is that you are learning a skill over time. You're learning the ability to notice that your mind is wandering and to bring the attention back to the focus that you're engaging in. And as you do this over and over and over again, it's a behavioral practice. You get better at it. Your attention networks start to improve. You become a master of your attention networks. And then you start to notice that you become less reactive to your thoughts. And you have more self-regulation over your thought processes. And that leads to a realization that you are not your thoughts because you have developed the ability to self-regulate your thought processes. That means that you must be something else other than those thoughts. And that's true, of course. And that's a state we call metacognition. This realization that we are not our thoughts and we have the ability to self-regulate. And that metacognition really sort of underlies the psychological benefit of meditative practices. Now, metacognition is also the central construct behind the most powerful and universal form of psychotherapy today, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, whose goal is to become more aware of one's thought processes and change and re-regulate our relationship to our thoughts. And when we do that, we change our mood state. We change our stress level. And we're starting to not only understand that behavioral aspect of it, we're starting to understand the neuroscience of this as well. In fact, what we know is that when you are focusing your attention, engaging in meditation, you're engaging networks in the frontal lobes of the brain, the executive regions of the brain, the so-called dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And we know that that region of the brain has quieting connections with the emotional brain, the limbic system, where the stress and emotion response are created. So we're understanding not only that this works behaviorally, but we're understanding the neuroscience of how this is happening in the brain. And over time, people that meditate, their emotional brain, that limbic system, becomes more quiet, it becomes less active, because you have this higher self-regulation over your own stress and emotion, because you have developed this skill of the self-regulation of your own thought processes. And when you read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, what it's really about is that self-regulation over your thought processes.
I mean, it's obvious. It's just like everyone should meditate based on that. Everyone should do yoga, of course, but I mean, it is such a revelation that people run around in modern society and forget that they have so much more control over their lives and their mood state. And it's simple, right? It's if you get into the practice, and we'll talk about that in a minute, how you make it part of your practice, which is, I know, one of the big hurdles for many people. But before we talk about that, I wanted to talk about another aspect of yoga, which is the breathing. So the breath frequency and depth obviously has an enormous impact on our psychological and physiological states. And I have written it succinctly here, so I'm going to find how I wrote it. It's fascinating because multiple traditional cultures over time have incorporated deep breathing into their chants, prayers, songs, and rituals. I mean, examples are the Native Americans, Buddhists, Muslims, Hawaiians, Africans, and even in Kundalini yoga, the Satanama, when you're singing it, all of these different cultures, you end up breathing about 5.5 to 6 breaths a minute, which this slow, deep breathing has multiple benefits, right? Enhanced parasympathetic activity, which is turning off that fight or flight and relaxing you, and improved emotional control, like you just talked about with meditation, and psychological well-being. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about the role of breathing in yoga and why breath work is so important too.
Yeah, that's really a critical practice. And in fact, it's one of the practices within yoga that people start engaging in, gravitating to, I mean, virtually after their first yoga class. It's that immediate, because the breath is with us all the time. I mean, it's accessible 24 hours a day. You know, it's there with us. And we have a unique situation in humans as compared to animals. We have the capability of consciously regulating our breath. And man, animals don't do this. Their breathing is automatic entirely. And so what we're finding is really remarkable results when we start to do breath regulation. Now, one of the most common forms of meditative breathing is the long, slow, deep breathing. And as you mentioned, this is much slower than the typical range of 15 to 20 breaths per minute that people in average society engage in. And when you slow your breathing down, and you can slow it down to, anywhere from down to even 2 breaths per minute, depending upon your capability of breathing. And when you do that, the breathing has enormous effects on both your autonomic nervous system and your central nervous system. And breath regulation, when you slow your breathing down, it reduces the stress activation system. So it reduces the sympathetic drive, enhances parasympathetic activity. So that's a very powerful effect on the autonomic nervous system. On the central nervous system, it reduces emotion responses. It quiets emotional reactivity down. We know that it also has some degree of efficacy in reducing pain. And the neurophysiology is really starting to come to light. We're starting to see regions of the brain that are directly responsible for translating our breathing frequency and depth into neural activity.
Wow.
So there's regions in the brain whose activity is exactly synchronized with our breath. I mean,
Wow.
this tells you that our breathing is changing our brain behavior. Now, in yoga, what we do is a lot of slow breathing. And when you do that regularly, you actually start slowing your spontaneous natural breathing frequency down. So this now becomes sort of a permanent, semi-permanent change in your stress and emotion regulation. It contributes to this down regulation of stress and emotion. And so people who practice, breathing techniques over a longer period, their breath rate slows down and becomes deeper. The other thing about that, it's not just neurophysiological. This form of breathing is highly efficient. It actually takes less energy to breathe long and deep and slow, because essentially when you breathe deeper and slower, you are opening up more of your lungs.
Okay.
So that becomes more efficient because, you're using more of your lung surface. Obviously, if you're doing very shallow chest breathing, you're not opening up your lungs very much. So you're using up actually more energy to breathe faster than you are if you're breathing slower. So it has impacts not just on neurophysiology, but also on physiology itself. This has actually been used by mountain climbers. So, really informed mountain climbers, when they're coming to the top of a mountain peak, they'll breathe very slowly, and that obviates their need for supplementary oxygen tanks. It's that effective. So just remarkable changes to the impact of slow breathing on behavior and health in positive ways.
Wonderful. So we've talked about many aspects of yoga. And I know that your teachings have emphasized that yoga is for everyone, not just, the pop culture version of a healthy young woman, right? And there's numerous types of yoga and ways to practice it. You could
Mhm.
online or in classes alone. So, do you have any suggestions on how you determine which type of yoga is the best fit, and also how frequent yoga should be practiced, ideally, to incur benefits?
Okay, two questions that are very important. Now, the first question is absolutely critical. Um, Yoga has become very popular, with 15% of the population, over 40 million people practicing yoga. You can imagine that anything becomes popular, becomes diversified. And so there's many types of yoga, from very limited forms of yoga where they're doing nothing but the postures and exercises. And the goal there really is to become slim and fit and have the yoga bod, but nothing else. And then there's the traditional forms of yoga, which incorporate these, whole health changes, mind, body, and spirit. And so, what I recommend to people is that if you want to engage in a yoga practice that you're going to be able to sustain, you have to do some shopping, because there's a lot of yoga out there.
Yeah.
And the analogy I think that fits is, buying a car. You know, in the 1920s, there were one or two models. That was it. If you buy a car, that's what you buy. But it's become, obviously, cars have become very popular. So as they became popular, they diversified. So now when you go out to buy a car, well, what do you want to buy? You want to buy a foreign model? You want a local model? You want a pickup? You want a van? You want a car? What do you want to buy? And then there's all different car makes. So if you're going to buy a car, that's a big life decision. You want to be satisfied with your car so that you don't drive it for 1 month and say, this is crazy. This is not what I need. So what you do in such a major investment is you shop. You don't just walk down the street in the first used car lot you come to and the salesman says, buy this, and you buy that. Who does that? Nobody does that. You're going to end up with something that doesn't fit for you. So you go online, you start hunting for all the different car models. You look at their repair records, you look at their cargo capacity, you look at, whether it's a gas or electric, you look at all the different aspects to suit what you need and want in a car. And then you go to multiple car dealerships and drive these cars. You test drive them because you got to be comfortable in the car, right? And you got to shop around for who's giving you the best deal in terms of the price and financing or whatever. And then finally, after all of that, you put down your money, you buy the car. And then if you've done your shopping well, you are totally satisfied and you got a good car. You got to do the same with yoga. There's so many people out there that say things like, oh yeah, I tried yoga once. So yeah, what? They went to one yoga class, one style of yoga, one studio with one teacher, and probably had a less than optimal experience, and they said, that's yoga. And I don't resonate with that. Well, that's just one style among thousands and one teacher among thousands. So if you really want to get a yoga practice that's going to work for you, that's going to give you changes, and is going to inspire you to continue practicing, you do the shopping. You find a school, you go online, you look at all the different styles of yoga, what their focus is, you make that focus adjust to what you want out of the yoga. Then you go and you try the classes, not just one class, because different classes have different elements to them. So you do multiple classes in different studios with different teachers. Eventually, you will find a yoga that is a style and a teacher that just resonates and hits just exactly right. And when you do that, you really want to go. You will end up in a situation where you say, Tuesday and Thursday nights are my yoga nights. And that's where I am on Tuesday and Thursday nights. So don't schedule anything on those nights. I am going those nights. I have to go on those nights. If I don't go to those nights, my life is a wreck. I need those nights, and those are valuable to me. That's the relationship. You end up with a yoga practice that you have resonated with. And that takes time to find that. But it's really worth it to do that, because then you have a practice that's sustaining you in all those many different ways. So then, the other related question that you've asked is, well, how much do you need to practice? Well, This varies from individual to individual. It varies depending upon needs, your circumstances, and so on. But, typically it's also a question that we have to ask when we're doing a clinical trial. I mean, if we're studying yoga for generalized anxiety disorder, how much yoga do we need to give the patients, and over how long a period of time? How long should each session be? How many times per week? And we have to make some kind of decisions in the research design to make an intervention that works. So all I can do is sort of do a hand waving argument at this point in time, because we don't have the thousands of studies that have studied 1 day per week, 2 days per week, 3 days per week, et cetera, or the many different durations of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, et cetera. All I can tell you is that the majority of studies that have been done to look at measurable benefits or clinical improvements have been typically along the lines of many weeks, and typically around 4 weeks. So anywhere from 4 weeks to 8 weeks to 10 weeks, that kind of thing. It takes that long for the body to start adjust, for you start to making changes in your behavior and changes in your skill level with the practices. And then in terms of frequency, for Americans, it's very difficult for them to do something 6 days a week. You're going to forget about it. So if you can make it to 1 class per week or 2 classes per week, you're doing pretty well for an American, right? But beyond that, it's nice to have something every day. So if you can do a home practice for 15 minutes every day, and then do 1 class a week in a group setting, you may have enough there that you can experience a significant amount of benefit over the 4 or 8 weeks that you're practicing. And that's kind of what we do in North America when we design an intervention for a research study on yoga. We'll typically have 1 group class per week, and then they practice at home a set of practices that is 20 minutes a day. And that usually is enough to give significant benefit over time. So clearly, if someone comes up to you and says, I have chronic insomnia. If I do 1 yoga class per month, will that cure my insomnia? Well, that's an obvious answer for anybody to answer. And then the other side of it is, well, in order to fix my insomnia, do I have to do 2 hours of yoga every day of the week for 3 months? Well, you probably don't need that much. So somewhere in the middle, depending upon your particular life circumstances, the severity of your situation, your genes, your makeup, your upbringing, all of those things play into this. Is going to determine, how much benefit you need. But the bottom line is that the more you practice, the more benefit you're going to get.
And it is a lifelong skill, hopefully.
It is a lifelong skill. Once you learn how to slow your breathing down, once you learn how to focus your attention, nobody can take that away from you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I just have one question left, but I wanted to give Sharon a chance to see if she has any questions for you. She is a yoga practitioner for quite a while, right, Sharon? So I don't know if you have any questions yourself.
I do. First of all, Anne, thank you so much. I'm just so honored that you're here with us today. Thank you so very much. This is, I think, one of my very favorite podcasts, because I think that you're teaching people that will watch this podcast how to change their lives and how to change how they behave with each other. I have dogs. I'm so sorry. I had cancer, and before yoga was even popular, I read a book by Bernie Siegel, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And I used that for meditation to connect my treatment with my body. And I didn't even know what I was doing, but that saved my life. And that's exactly what was happening, is I was using meditation to cure myself by connecting my mind and my body. One thing that I'm so delighted that you're here today. I've learned so much from you. One thing is, I think yoga is so powerful. I'm wondering if there is some way for us to unite to get this is the technology side of my business, right? To get our government involved in subsidizing programs to help us to be able to make the right decisions, to get along with each other globally, and to make a shift, a global shift.
Mm.
You know, yoga up till, I don't know, 10 years ago was just yoga. Now people are really acknowledging, like, as you are teaching, how the importance of us working together in peace in our universe and our planet. I think it's really critical right now, especially for us to try to push forward to have some government subsidized programs to train us from little to old as part of our life.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, that's very important to me, to see that these practices are taught as part of everybody's lifestyle. And I like to use an analogy, and there's actually historical basis to this analogy. You know, in the 1800s, we had a major problem in the United States with our children who were experiencing real decrements in their oral health. They had cavities, there was a lot of oral pain. They could not study. I mean, constant pain. It was a terrible situation. And of course, we knew what the answer was. The answer was dental hygiene. And so what happened in the early 20th century is that schools started implementing dental hygiene into the schools to try and rectify this problem that was going on with the kids' health. And of course, that has evolved. And so now we live in a society where dental hygiene is not controversial. Dental hygiene is not strange. It's not weird. In fact, we think it's weird if you don't do dental hygiene. I mean, you go on a trip, it's just second nature. You take a toothbrush and toothpaste and all that, you know, you do this everywhere all the time. It has become part of our lifestyle. We don't even think about it. So the analogy here is, instead of dental hygiene, oral hygiene, we're talking about mind-body hygiene. We're talking about maintaining the physical body, maintaining our nervous system and our psychology to function optimally. And in order to do that, you need to do these mind-body practices. And that keeps you healthy physically, emotionally, and mentally. So the question is, how do we translate this? How do we get this to be at the point where dental hygiene is right now, oral hygiene is? And the answer is to bring it into the schools. If we can get yoga into the public schools, everyone gets it. I mean, everyone. It's a law that children have to go to school. So, I mean, if all the kids are going to school and all the kids are getting yoga, it's covered, it's done, you know, period. And so how do you convince the policymakers, the decision makers in schools to implement yoga? And the problem is that they need justification to make that decision. They need evidence and they need justification. And that means research. You have to demonstrate that bringing yoga into schools will change behavior, change psychology, change health overall. And once you do that, that is a sufficient justification. And I'll tell you that this is really important right now because our children are experiencing an enormous burden in psychological health problems. Over 20% of adolescents have seriously attempted committing suicide. That's how strong the incidence of depression is. Then there are, 40% of children are obese. We're seeing these and non-communicable diseases appearing in our kids. The chronic stress these kids are experiencing, and the other mental health conditions, the degree of substance abuse that's there. It's a huge mental health burden in our children. So not only is this something that we want to do for prevention, for implementing in societies when these kids grow up into adulthood, we need to address their burden right now. So there's multiple reasons. And if we can justify that, show research evidence that when we bring yoga into schools, we're reducing the kids' perceived stress. We're reducing their emotional burden of depression, anxiety, substance abuse. We're reducing all the risk factors for NCDs. We're making them healthier. We're making them sleep better. And we're increasing their performance. We're improving their grades by giving them these practices. That is the justification that a school district supervisor needs to be able to say, I'm going to put yoga in all my schools, because I know that the cost of putting that into the schools in terms of the time taken away from the regular curriculum and the cost of the yoga teachers is easily going to outweigh the negative stuff that the kids are dealing with and the pain and suffering that's going on. And even if we can prevent one suicide per year in a school, isn't that enough justification to do these kinds of mind-body practices, to give these kids the skills to be able to maintain their chronic stress and their emotional health? So it's really the research that's necessary to do this. And the decisions will be made at state, district, and local levels. In some schools, the principal has the authority to make that change. He or she can bring yoga into their school. So, but the justification really has to be there, because as soon as you try and do something in the schools, the reaction is, how can you put something in when we're not giving enough to the kids already? You need to justify taking something out to bring yoga in.
Right.
So it really is necessary to have the research to show that the benefit it outweighs the cost.
And thank you for making this your life work to do the research, so that to support, so that the schools and healthcare and other businesses will realize the importance of yoga. And actually, you've answered my last question, because I do think that when we talk about Hickory, we're talking about hope, health, and healing, hope in the present, hope in the future, health in the present, and healing in the past, and both for individuals and the planet. We talked about the planet, and I think I know your answer. What can help people with hope, health, and healing? It's yoga. But please elaborate, if you would like, about how yoga makes you hopeful for health.
Well, I think it changes your relationship to yourself. It changes your relationship to the community. It changes your relationship to the nation, to the continent, and to the planet as a whole. I mean, yoga really works on non-duality. There are so many places in humanity, in modern society, that are based on duality. It's them and us, that country and my country, that religion and my religion, that culture and my culture, that gender and my gender, that age and my age. I mean, there's so much of that discriminatory, dualistic way of viewing the world, which is responsible for all of, really all of the ills that we're experiencing in modern society. And what could be more appropriate than inculcating this experience of non-duality in people? That's really fundamental. And so, when I talk about yoga in public schools, I'm most often talking about fixing the problems that kids have and giving them the skills to prevent those problems in the future. But the other thing is, what we're really doing is we're enhancing their overall life performance as human beings. We're making them better people. It's not just fixing the bad stuff, it's increasing the positive psychology and the positive psychological states, gratitude, kindness, all of those other things that we have so much reverence for. We make better people when we become yoga practitioners. And I like to do a thought experiment with this. Imagine that every school in the country has yoga taught, and it's the contemplative form of yoga, where it's not only postures and exercises, but the breathing techniques, the deep relaxation, and the meditative component, the mindfulness component. It's there from kindergarten to grade 12, and it happens in every school in the country for 3 generations. You have an entire society who's been exposed to these behavioral practices of mind-body hygiene. They're now functioning optimally as human beings. which means a lot more of this positive psychology. And that is extremely hopeful for the future.
That would be amazing. And with your work, we're going to hope that we get there someday. Thank you so much for your time. I don't have any other questions. Sharon?
No, I'm just really
Good.
honored that, and good job. You're always at the rock star of selecting the best podcast interviewees. So, no, I'm just really honored to be part of this conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And any other parting comments that you have for us, Dr. Khalsa?
Well, I think it's just all about the practice, and when you practice and when you experience these positive benefits, then, and this happens automatically, but I think it needs to be stated as well, share. And the best kind of sharing is teach. And so many people who have had their lives changed in such a positive way with yoga will then go on to become yoga teachers themselves, because they say, I need to share this.
Mhm.
It's not just an option for me to share this. I need to share this. And that's where it really starts to move across all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yes, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure joining you.
Mhm.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.